This is part three of the emerging adult piece, and we are going to be talking or starting to talk about psychopathologies. So these are diagnosable mental health disorders. As we know, we've talked as we go along about a few things that could be diagnosed in the DSM, including the learning disabilities in middle childhood, eating disorders in adolescence, and now we're going to be adding to this some of these mental health disorders can show up earlier than emerging adult, but oftentimes they may not get treated. They may be left untreated until a little bit later, so between the ages of 18 and 25. In general, emerging adulthood is a time of growing happiness and increasing resiliency, this freedom, but it can also be an increased incidence of the psychopathologies. So, what's causing these? These are some questions that we always have. And the responses can be on the nature side, right? They can be biological, perhaps genetic causes. But not all causes are genetic. There are also a number of things on the nurture side. You can probably think of many of these: past experiences, childhood traumas, current stresses. So there's nature and there's nurture to be considered, and maybe a little bit of both. So there is a model, it's called the diathesis stress model, and you'll find that in your textbook. You might want to look it up and write it down. I'll read you a quick definition here. The diathesis stress model views psychopathology as a consequence of stress interacting with an underlying predisposition, think biological, psychosocial, sociocultural, to produce a specific disorder. So it's really this interaction of stress along with a predisposition, whether it's genetic or um, a nurture kind of predisposition, and that can result in a specific disorder. So a little bit of things, a few things to notice here. Except for dementia, emerging adults experience more of every diagnosed psychological disorder than any other group. It's double the rate of people 25 years or older. So it is a very high incidence during emerging adult. But why this uptick at the time of emerging adult? So if I were to ask you, thinking about that diathesis stress model, what are the stressors in your life as an emerging adult? You might be able to either reflect back or reflect on your current time right now and tell me all kinds of things. And I'm just going to list a few that I've had in the classroom before when I've asked what are the stressors for an emerging adult. Maybe that's sexual freedom that we talked about earlier, and managing the resulting relationships and managing the sort of that serial monogamy, going in and out of relationships. Maybe parents are less involved in everyday life, and that can be a source of stress on people. Now they have the new responsibilities of managing rent, transportation, food, etc. Joblessness. Depression is 3 times as likely for an emerging adult without a job than for an emerging adult with a job. Substance abuse can be another form of stress. Multiple stressors. So when we have um, more than one stressor, it's that cumulative effect. So maybe we can handle managing the transportation issue, but then maybe there's a problem with transportation, and then you miss a school-related event that was really important to you. So notice how it starts to build. If stressors are building, that can be very difficult. Financial stress, clearly a very important aspect for emerging adults. Education, this advanced education, the field that there's a need for it in order to achieve a position, a job that will make us enough money to earn the lifestyle that we want. Family, church, college. So I've always had no lack of stressors listed when I ask this question in the classroom. Now, reflect for a moment at strength. in any one of these areas can be very protective. So if you have a very, let's say, supportive parent or supportive caregiver within your family, someone you can look to and talk to about these things, that is very positive and can counteract some of the effects or impacts of the stressors. Maybe you have very reliable transportation and that car has just been great. It always gets you to where you need to go. Then maybe that has really helped to ease perhaps the overall cumulative stress. We don't usually have it all, but if we have a few things that are going positively, it can help us manage the other stressors that are in our lives. So the three common disorders that I typically mention for emerging adults include number one, anxiety, number two, depression, and number three, schizophrenia. So a few things about anxiety. 25% of all U.S. residents below the age of 25 have been diagnosed as anxious, and twice as many women than men. Anxiety includes things such as panic attacks, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, phobias. And your textbook mentions social phobias, the fear of talking to other people. So anxiety would probably be the number one disorder that can manifest itself at this time. Number two is depression. Before age 30, 8% of U.S. adults are diagnosed with depression. The symptoms can come and go. The symptoms include a lack of interest in things that are typically interesting, a lack of pleasure in everyday things that we might see typically as pleasurable. There's a great deal of social cost to this, lost time at work, cancers, heart disease. There are more women than men diagnosed with depression. And sometimes we fail to get treatment, but really depression can be relieved with treatment, with social support, with medication, with therapy. And then the third disorder that we mention here is schizophrenia. So 1% of all adults in the United States can be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is this overwhelm of disorganized and bizarre thinking. It can include delusions and hallucinations. Half of all sufferers have a first episode in adolescence or in emerging adults, so right around this 20-year-old age mark, it's very common to have a first sort of incidence of schizophrenia. There are many different risk factors, genetics, and also nurture sorts of risk factors. Malnutrition, while developing in the womb, has been associated with schizophrenia. Social pressures, drug use also correlated with schizophrenia. Okay, so those were the three different psychological disorders that I wanted to bring up here, depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia. To finish up this video, I want to mention also taking risks. This doesn't usually get diagnosed as a disorder, but there's certainly more emerging adults bravely or perhaps foolishly risking their lives. So what kinds of behaviors come to mind? Again, if I ask this in the classroom, I usually get things like bungee jumping, motorcycle racing. Let's see, the list can go on. Extreme sports, extreme skiing, snowboarding, skateboarding, skateboarding without a helmet, etc. All the different kinds of activities can be sort of associated with this high risk taking that emerging adults may tend to engage in. So extreme risk-taking is not usually considered pathological, but on the other hand, the three leading causes of death for individuals in the age group 15 to 25 include accidents, homicides, and suicide. So Remember, though, that this is a very healthy age group in general. So these accidents, homicide, and suicide all combined kill more than all of the diseases combined that might have impacted emerging adults. Emerging adult men are the most common killers and the most common victims. Okay, so risk taking is age and gender related, but is it sane? Is it pathological? Is it just part of this age group? These are questions that people ask. A quick mention about drug use and perhaps drug abuse. The picture here is of probably college campus showing excessive drinking, and drug abuse is listed in the DSM. There is a listing substance use disorder. It's recognized as a psychological disorder. It occurs when the drug use is harmful to physical, cognitive, or psychosocial well-being. So, for instance, if a person needs alcohol to go to sleep, that is considered a substance use disorder. So we have to have it to help manage a piece of our life. So when when the absence of the drug causes intense cravings and repeated use, that can be classified as drug addiction, and the withdrawals can be physical as well as psychological. Drug abuse, especially alcohol and marijuana, are more common among college students than other emerging adults. And caffeine, I mentioned that because there is a high amount in all different kinds of drinks that sometimes we don't think about. Red Bull is one that's a favorite. Different kinds of energy drinks can have high levels of caffeine. And these highly caffeinated beverages can be correlated with dangerous driving, with sexual assault, and very high doses of caffeine can be lethal, can end people up in the emergency rooms. Okay, last slide I have here, this is the final one that we'll touch base with, shows I'm thinking these are college students, that most college students, when surveyed, study hard and avoid binge drinking, refuse drugs, are sexually abstinent or faithful, or use protection during sex. And this is more the norm than the extremes or other examples that we've talked about, and that may be based on what's called an availability bias. So we see what is extreme in the media, in the newspaper, on the news. The student who dies on campus from a drug overdose or from binge drinking is likely to make the news more so than all those students who didn't binge drink and who are studying hard, working hard toward their futures. So the availability of information about more extreme examples is more common in our societies, shared more within the media than what is normal, the average student who is working hard. So that's what I've got for these PowerPoints. Thank you.